Romel, you promised 3% a day on Bitcoin trading.
Praetorian was a registered trading company.
You were never trading at the scale to pay that.
Ramil Ventura Palafox, $201 million collected, 90,000 victims across the globe, and 20 years in federal prison. This is how it all started.
Every term was posted on the platform.
The platform showed gains you invented.
Show me one investor I lied to.
He would not get the chance to explain. Within months of that moment, federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia would file an indictment that ran to dozens of pages. More than 90,000 investors. More than $201 million collected. 8,198 Bitcoin. And one online dashboard that had been lying to every single one of them for nearly 2 years. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever logged into an investment account, watched the balance go up, and just trusted that the number was real? Drop a comment and tell me. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. We cover financial predators on this channel every single week, and this one might be the biggest of them all by victim headcount. Ramil Ventura Palafox was born in 1964 in the Philippines, in a country still navigating the early years of Ferdinand Marcos's rule. He was the kind of child who learned early that money meant freedom. His family was not poor, but they were not wealthy either. They were the careful middle. Money was counted out at the kitchen table. Receipts were saved in a tin. Children were told, often and precisely, what things cost. By the time Palafox reached his late teens, the family was already discussing the United States. America was the destination. America was where the engineers and the nurses and the accountants of Manila were going. Palafox eventually became a dual citizen, holding passports from both countries, moving between Manila and the West Coast with a kind of mobility his parents had never imagined. In his 20s, he worked. The records are not glamorous. Small businesses, door-to-door sales, storefront commission jobs in California strip malls. The kind of work where the only number that mattered was the check at the end of the week. Friends from that era would later describe him as charming, confident, always pitching something. He had the voice. He had the smile. He had what people in the multi-level marketing world call presence. He could walk into a room of strangers and walk out with their phone numbers. By the early 2000s, Palafox had drifted toward the world of multi-level marketing in earnest. Health products, nutritional supplements, the recruitment dinners in hotel conference rooms off the Pacific Coast Highway and along Roxas Boulevard, the whiteboards with the binary tree drawn out in marker, the promises that if you just brought in 2 people, and those 2 brought in 2 more, the math would carry you all the way to financial freedom. He learned the script. He learned the cadence. He learned the small theatrical pauses where a presenter is supposed to look at the floor as if humbled by his own success. He learned, most of all, that the product was almost never the point. The product was an excuse. The point was the recruiting. He married, he had children. He moved between Manila and California and eventually settled into a life that traveled between the Philippines and the Las Vegas Valley. His children grew up watching their father work the phones, work the rooms, work the cousins and the in-laws and the second cousins of cousins. He was not a stockbroker. He was not a licensed financial advisor. He held no certification to manage other people's money, but he had spent 2 decades learning, in granular detail, exactly how to make people believe he could. The pivot moment came around 2017 and 2018, when Bitcoin became a household word. The first crypto bubble had inflated and partially collapsed, but the language of the boom remained. Blockchain, decentralized, high-volume trading, arbitrage, words that meant almost nothing to a retired schoolteacher in Cebu or a registered nurse in Sacramento, but sounded like the future. Palafox watched the language take hold. He watched ordinary people who had never bought a single share of a public company suddenly call themselves crypto investors. He watched the YouTube channels balloon. He watched the Telegram groups fill with strangers comparing screenshots of returns. He saw an opening that fit his skill set exactly. Multi-level marketing, new investors recruiting newer investors, a binary tree, a referral commission, wrapped this time in the language of Bitcoin, wrapped in the dialect of the post-2018 boom. In late 2019, he registered a company, Praetorian Group International, PGI Global. He named himself chairman, chief executive officer, and lead promoter. He was 55 years old. He had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment, and he was about to use every minute of it. To understand how PGI Global worked, you have to understand two systems that were already deeply familiar to a generation of investors. The first was multi-level marketing. The second was the architecture of the post-2018 crypto market. Multi-level marketing, by itself, is not illegal in the United States. The structure is simple. You buy in. You recruit others to buy in beneath you. You earn commissions on the purchases of the people you recruit and on the purchases of the people they recruit, down through several levels of a tree. In a legitimate MLM, there is an actual product moving. Vitamins, skincare, cleaning supplies. The commissions are funded by retail sales to people outside the network. In an illegitimate one, there is no product, or the product is a fiction. The money flowing in from new recruits is the only money there is, and that money is paid out to earlier recruits as if it were a return on investment. That is the definition of a pyramid scheme. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. And in the world of crypto, that line had become almost impossible for an ordinary investor to see, because the supposed product was a financial instrument they did not understand in the first place. The second system was the shape of the 2019 crypto market itself. Bitcoin had hit a peak above $19,000 in late 2017, then collapsed across 2018, then begun a slow climb back. Ordinary investors who had missed the first wave were watching, waiting, refreshing CoinMarketCap on their phones. They knew they did not understand the technology. They knew they did not have the time to learn it. So they were looking for someone who already did, someone who could trade for them, someone who could speak the language of the blockchain and translate it into a number that climbed on a screen. PGI Global sold itself as precisely that intermediary. The pitch was clean. PGI, the company claimed, operated a high-volume Bitcoin trading desk. It used proprietary algorithms. It made small, rapid trades around the clock across multiple exchanges. And because it traded at scale, it could deliver returns that no individual investor could match. Daily returns of 0.5% to 3%, compounded, every single day. The math, if you stopped for 10 seconds to do it, was already impossible. 0.5% a day, compounded over a year, is a return of roughly 500%. 3% a day, compounded, is a return that does not fit on a calculator. No legitimate trading operation in the history of markets has produced numbers anywhere close to that. Not Renaissance Technologies, not Citadel, not anyone. The numbers PGI was advertising would have made it the most successful trading firm ever to exist by several orders of magnitude. But the people getting the pitch were not hedge fund analysts. They were nurses, teachers, drivers, small business owners, retirees in the Philippines, immigrants in California, working people in the United Kingdom. They were people who had been told their entire lives that the financial system was rigged against them. And now someone smiling and confident, someone who spoke their language and looked like their cousin, was telling them there was a way in. The vulnerability was not in the system. The vulnerability was in the trust. The operation began on December 1st, 2019. In the first weeks, PGI Global was a small operation by Ponzi standards. A few hundred investors, a few $1 million, mostly drawn from Palafox's existing network of MLM contacts in California and the Philippines. He hosted introductory sessions in hotel conference rooms in Los Angeles, in Las Vegas, in Quezon City, in Cebu. He filmed promotional videos for YouTube and Facebook. He spoke into the camera in English and in Tagalog, and sometimes a sentence at a time in Cebuano. He used the same phrases over and over: high-volume trading, proprietary algorithm, passive income, financial freedom, daily compounding gains. He brought his children into the optics of the company. He elevated trusted recruiters into senior corporate-sounding titles. He paid the first wave of investors their promised returns, on time, every day, in full. And those investors did exactly what he needed them to do. They told their friends, they told their parents, they told their church groups and their nursing colleagues and their old high school classmates. They posted screenshots of their dashboards to Facebook and Instagram with captions in 3 languages. The dashboard. That was the second piece of the operation, and it was the most important piece in the entire machine. When you signed up for PGI Global, you received login credentials to a sleek online investor portal. You logged in. You saw your balance. You saw a small green number next to it, ticking upward at the rate PGI had promised you. Every 24 hours, the balance grew by 0.5%, or 1%, or 2%, or 3%, depending on the tier of package you had purchased. The numbers compounded. The line chart on your dashboard climbed steadily, day after day, week after week, month after month. It was hypnotic. It looked like the kind of chart that should not be allowed to exist, climbing in a straight diagonal as if drawn by a ruler. It was also entirely fake. There was no trading algorithm. There was no high-volume Bitcoin trading desk. The dashboard was software. The numbers were generated by code that calculated what the gain should have been at the rate Palafox had promised, and displayed it back to the investor as if it were real. When you logged in and saw your account had grown by 2% overnight, what you were seeing was a number that had been written by a script the moment you refreshed the page. There were no trades behind it. There were no profits behind it. There was a function in a piece of code that multiplied a balance by a small percentage every day, and that was the entire engine. The actual Bitcoin, the actual cash, the actual money that 90,000 people around the world had sent into PGI Global was being moved through wallets and bank accounts controlled by Palafox and his inner circle. Some of it went to pay withdrawals from earlier investors, the way every Ponzi scheme has paid them since Charles Ponzi himself stamped his name on the model in 1920. A great deal of it went somewhere else entirely. It went to 20 luxury cars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, McLarens, Aston Martins, roughly $3 million in vehicles parked across garages in the Las Vegas Valley and Los Angeles. It went to penthouse stays at high-end hotels, roughly $329,000 on penthouse rentals alone. It went to 4 homes, 2 in Las Vegas, 2 in Los Angeles, a combined value of more than $6 million. It went to suits and watches and dinners and chartered drives along the Pacific Coast Highway in cars that ordinary investors in the network would only ever see in his social media posts. By 2020, PGI was running full-scale recruitment campaigns across 3 continents: the Philippines, the United States, the United Kingdom. By early 2021, the company had collected more than $201 million from over 90,000 investors. 8,198 Bitcoin, valued at deposit at roughly $171.5 million, plus another $30.3 million in cash. The money kept coming in, the dashboard kept lying, and Palafox kept driving. We are heading into the part of the story where the whole thing starts to come apart. Before we do, if you have made it this far, you already know this channel does not let stories like this stay buried. Subscribe if you have not yet. The next few minutes are why this case became one of the largest crypto fraud prosecutions by victim count in recent memory. Every Ponzi scheme has the same fatal weakness. It needs new money constantly to pay old promises. The moment new money slows down, the entire structure begins to fail. PGI Global was no different. By the middle of 2021, after almost 2 years of explosive growth, the recruitment curve began to flatten. The pool of fresh investors thinned. The math began to work against Palafox, not for him. The first sign was withdrawals. Investors who tried to pull money out began to encounter delays. PGY's customer service blamed technical issues. They blamed blockchain congestion. They blamed regulatory paperwork in offshore jurisdictions. They blamed everything except the truth, which was that there was simply not enough money in the company's accounts to satisfy the redemptions being requested. In June and July of 2021, withdrawals slowed to a trickle. Then they stopped altogether. PGI announced what it called a temporary freeze. The dashboard, of course, kept showing gains. Investors who logged in saw their balances continue to grow, in vivid green, in real time. They just could not access any of the money those balances supposedly represented. The catalyst came from Manila. The Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines had been quietly watching PGI Global for months. They had received complaints from investors. They had reviewed PGI's marketing materials. They had looked at the promised daily returns, done the math, and reached the only conclusion the math allowed. On September 16, 2021, the Philippine SEC issued a public advisory. It named PGI Global by name. It identified the company as a Ponzi scheme. It warned the public to stop investing immediately and to stop recruiting others into the platform. The advisory traveled fast. It traveled in Tagalog. It traveled in English. It traveled through the Facebook groups and the Telegram channels where PGI's pitch had spread for 2 years. Within days, the company's recruitment pipeline collapsed. Investors flooded the platform with withdrawal requests. The dashboard, somehow, kept showing gains. But there were no gains. There had never been any gains. In October 2021, PGI Global went dark. Across the next year, international regulators began to move. The United Kingdom's Financial Conduct Authority shut down PGI's British operations in 2022. Investors in 3 countries began organizing. They compared dashboards. They compared deposit records. They began to add up their losses, and the number kept climbing. What no one yet knew, including Palafox himself, was that the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States had already opened a file. The federal investigation into Ramil Ventura Palafox was a coordinated effort between the FBI and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, working out of the Eastern District of Virginia. It would take more than 3 years to build to indictment. The first task was tracing the money. Bitcoin transactions are public. Every transfer on the blockchain is recorded permanently on a public ledger that anyone with the right tools can read. PGI had collected its investors' Bitcoin into wallets it controlled. Those wallets were traceable. The cash deposits, more than $30 million of them, had moved through traditional banking channels and were equally traceable through subpoenaed bank records. Investigators worked their way backward from Palafox's spending. The 4 homes were a matter of public record: 2 in Las Vegas, 2 in Los Angeles. Combined value over $6 million. The deeds and the mortgages and the title transfers told their own story in plain language. The cars were even easier. 20 luxury vehicles, each one registered, insured, and in many cases photographed by Palafox himself for his own social media. About $3 million in cars purchased during the same window when his company was claiming to operate a high-volume trading desk that, in reality, did not exist. The penthouse stays, roughly $329,000 of them, were documented in hotel records, reservation confirmations, credit card receipts, concierge logs, room service tabs. But the most important piece of evidence was the dashboard itself. Federal investigators obtained access to PGI's servers and to the source code of the investor portal. What they found was the smoking gun of the entire case, sitting in plain text in a code repository. The dashboard's growth numbers were not pulled from any trading account. They were not connected to any exchange API. They were not connected to any external data feed of any kind. They were generated internally by a piece of software that calculated what the gain should have been at the promised daily rate and displayed it back to the user as if it were a real account balance. There was no algorithm. There was no high-volume trading. There was a function in a piece of code that multiplied a balance by a small percentage every 24 hours and wrote the result to the screen. Investigators also recovered communications, internal messages between Palafox and his lieutenants, discussions of the freeze on withdrawals, conversations about how to manage investor complaints. Conversations, crucially, that showed Palafox knew exactly what PGI was and exactly what it was not. He was not a confused executive trying to manage a failing legitimate business. He was the architect of a deliberate fraud, and he knew it. The forensic accountants assembled the full picture. More than $201 million collected, over 90,000 investors worldwide, at least $30.3 million in cash, 8,198 Bitcoin, valued at deposit at roughly $171.5 million. Victim losses, after accounting for whatever could be clawed back from Palafox's seized assets, of at least $62.7 million. In April of 2025, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission filed civil charges against Palafox. The criminal indictment followed shortly afterward: wire fraud, money laundering, federal charges carrying decades of potential prison time. When agents began coordinating his arrest, Palafox was still living in one of his Las Vegas homes. He still had the cars in the garage. He still had the suits in the closet. He still, according to investigators, believed he could talk his way out of it. He could not. The confrontation happened on a weekday morning in the Las Vegas Valley. Federal agents arrived at the residence. Palafox came to the door. He was 60 years old. He was wearing what witnesses would describe as a polo shirt and pressed slacks, as if he were on his way to a business meeting. The agents identified themselves. They explained the warrant. They explained the charges. "This has to be a mistake," Palafox said, by accounts of the encounter. "I run a legitimate business. We had technical issues. That is not fraud." The lead agent did not engage with the argument. The agent simply asked Palafox to step outside. "You don't understand what we do," Palafox said. "I have records. I have documentation. We were trading. You can verify it." "Sir," the agent answered, "we have already verified it." Palafox stopped talking. The agents walked him to a waiting vehicle. He did not resist. He looked, by every account, like a man who had spent 2 years preparing arguments for this exact moment and was discovering, in real time, that none of those arguments were going to work. The dashboard he had built to fool 90,000 investors had also, in some quiet way, been fooling him. He had spent so long inside the language of high-volume trading that he had begun to talk as if the money in those luxury garages were money he had actually earned through skill. He had begun to act as if the green line on the dashboard had any relationship at all to the real world. It did not. At his initial appearance in federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia, Palafox was represented by counsel. He listened to the charges: wire fraud, money laundering. He entered a not guilty plea, as defendants almost always do at first. But the evidence by that point was a wall: the blockchain, the bank records, the source code, the internal communications, the deeds and the registrations and the hotel receipts. There was no version of a trial that ended in an acquittal. Every plausible defense ran into the same problem. The trading desk that was supposed to be generating the returns did not exist. In September of 2025, Ramil Ventura Palafox pleaded guilty: wire fraud, money laundering. He admitted the scheme. He admitted the dashboard. He admitted the missing trading operation. He did not yet know what the judge would do with him. The sentencing took place on February 13, 2026, in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The courtroom was full. Victims had traveled to attend. Some had flown in from the Philippines. Some had driven across the United States. Some had crossed the Atlantic from the United Kingdom. They sat in the gallery in suits and modest dresses, holding folders of documents, holding printouts of dashboards that had once shown them a future they had spent years saving toward. The government presented its sentencing memorandum: more than $201 million collected, over 90,000 investors, at least $62.7 million in confirmed victim losses, 20 luxury cars, 4 homes, $329,000 in penthouse stays, a pattern of fraud that had spanned 3 continents and nearly 2 years, a dashboard that had been engineered from the first line of code to deceive. Victims spoke. A retired teacher from Quezon City who had put her life savings into PGI to fund her grandchildren's education. A registered nurse from the United Kingdom who had borrowed against her home to increase her position in the platform. A small business owner from California who had recruited his own brother and sister and elderly mother into the scheme and now could not face them at family gatherings. One after another, they described the same thing: the dashboard, the numbers that climbed every day, the screenshots they had shared with pride. The morning in 2021 when the withdrawals stopped and they realized slowly, then all at once, that the future they had been watching grow on a screen was a piece of software, and the money was already gone. The judge listened to all of it. When the judge spoke, the judge addressed Palafox directly. The court noted the scale of the harm. The court noted the deliberateness of the dashboard, which had been built line by line to lie. The court noted that this was not an investment that had failed. This was an investment that had never existed in the first place. The court noted the luxury cars and the homes and the penthouses, all purchased with the money of nurses and teachers and drivers, while those nurses and teachers and drivers were being shown a screen full of fabricated gains. The court sentenced Ramil Ventura Palafox to 20 years in federal prison. 20 years, 240 months. He would be in his early 80s when he was eligible for release. The court ordered restitution. It ordered forfeiture of the homes, the cars, the remaining wallets, anything that could be recovered and returned to the people who had funded his life. The Lamborghinis went to auction. The Bentleys went to auction. The Ferraris went to auction. The 4 homes went to auction. The Bitcoin that could still be traced went into the restitution fund. For the 90,000 victims, the recovery would be partial at best. $62.7 million in losses was never going to be made whole by 20 cars and 4 houses, no matter how expensive any single one of them had been. Many of the people who lost everything to PGI Global will spend the rest of their working lives trying to rebuild what was taken from them in a few clicks of a registration form. But the dashboard, finally, had stopped lying. The numbers had stopped climbing. The screen had gone dark. And for the first time in almost 2 years, the math added up. This case was staggering in scale. But the next case on the right-hand side may be the most cold-blooded financial predator we have ever covered on this channel. Click it now.